A mercenary named Jack Aaron sits across from a young girl and asks if she is an alchemist. She introduces herself as Alice, and he compliments her name. Alice seems skeptical of him and observes that he has no mana. Jack finds this unusual and asks her about magic and mana, which she admits she knows a lot about. He tells her he has many questions and hints that his story is long. A few hours earlier, Jack was on a mission and called for backup after retrieving a chip, but his team told him to escape on his own. He realized they had abandoned him and, frustrated, promised to make them pay. He set up explosives and waited as a convoy approached. When the vehicles came close, he triggered the explosives, causing a massive explosion that sent cars flying. He laughed at the destruction, mocking his enemies, and prepared for the next attack. His opponents realized too late that he had set more traps. As they tried to advance, more explosions went off, and Jack continued his assault. He wore a gas mask and threw another weapon, blinding and disorienting them. He called himself Bomber, and told them to get some sleep, showing his confidence as a mercenary who thrives in chaos. Amidst the chaos of gunfire and the suffocating smoke of battle, Jack Aaron, known as Bomber, moves like a phantom through the battlefield, his masked face revealing nothing but the confident smirk of a man who thrives in destruction, and as his enemies stumble blindly, coughing through the haze, he emerges from the shadows with a pistol raised, his presence alone sending a ripple of fear through the scattered soldiers who desperately search for him, only for one of them to turn in horror as Jack coolly utters a single word before firing a merciless shot that sends his foe crumbling to the ground, and without hesitation he makes his escape, knowing full well that more will come, his enemies scrambling to pursue him, shouting that they must retrieve the chip at all costs, but their efforts are futile as explosions erupt beneath their feet, sending them flying in terror as they realize too late that the ground itself is littered with deadly landmines of Jack's own making, and with a triumphant grin, he revels in their panic, his laughter echoing as he taunts them, mocking their weakness, declaring that if they wish to take his life, they should bring hundreds more, before vanishing into the distance with an exhilarating rush of victory, and later, as the dust settles and the night air grows still, he finds brief solace in the quiet, cracking open a bottle with a satisfied sigh as he contemplates his next move, his mind already shifting to the reality that his current vehicle is far too conspicuous, considering the trail of destruction he has left behind, and as he weighs his options, wondering if he should hitchhike or find another means of escape, an unsettling hum fills the air, a sudden electric pulse crackling around him, his body stiffening in shock as glowing runes encircle him, trapping him in an intricate spell that roots him to the ground, and in an instant, the unstoppable mercenary who had danced through battle with effortless precision finds himself utterly powerless, his mind racing as he struggles against the unseen force, his voice breaking through the eerie glow as he realizes the impossible truth: he cannot move. In an instant, the crackling energy beneath Jack Aaron's feet erupts into a blinding surge of light, and before he can react, the world around him distorts, his vision blurring as his body is forcefully pulled through a vortex of swirling magic, and when the brilliance fades, he finds himself standing in the center of an unfamiliar grand chamber, its towering columns stretching toward a domed ceiling adorned with intricate symbols that seem to hum with latent power, and as the last wisps of summoning energy dissipate around him, he slowly tilts his head back, exhaling in quiet disbelief while armored guards stand at the ready, their watchful gazes locked onto him, and above on a lavish balcony, nobles and scholars murmur amongst themselves, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and calculation, yet none of them seem as bewildered as the ragtag group of strangers standing nearby, their clothes and mannerisms starkly different from the medieval surroundings, their confusion mirroring his own as they glance around in stunned realization, and as the weight of the situation begins to settle, Jack's sharp eyes dart toward the extravagant throne where a regal figure sits in composed authority, flanked by a robed minister whose twisted grin barely hides the self-satisfaction of a man who holds all the answers, and with a grandiose sweep of his hand, he welcomes them as honored guests from another world, his words laced with an unsettling enthusiasm as he reveals that they have been summoned to serve as heroes, a strategic advantage in a war brewing against neighboring nations, and while the others reel from the revelation, some murmuring in disbelief, some clenching their fists in frustration, Jack simply raises an eyebrow, lifting a bottle to his lips and taking a slow, deliberate sip, his mind processing the absurdity with the detached amusement of a man who has seen too much to be easily shaken. But as the minister insists on assessing their abilities, glowing status screens materialize before each individual, revealing names, ranks, and skills, and while the summoned students marvel at their newfound powers, Gasping in awe at their high levels and rare abilities, Jack glances at his own display with a bemused smirk, noting that his level is a mere one, his rank non-existent. Yet his skill in bomb-making has been recognized as an extraordinary talent, and with a resigned chuckle, he mutters to himself that anything really does go in this world. While the minister, momentarily taken aback, stares at his status with thinly veiled apprehension, perhaps realizing that among these summoned heroes, one man stands apart, not bound by the expectations of their prophecy, not wielding the kind of power they had anticipated, but instead carrying something far more unpredictable, the expertise of a mercenary who thrives in war, destruction, and the kind of chaos that no kingdom could ever truly control. As Jack Aaron stares at the glowing screen before him, his mind processes the absurdity of it all, the words bomb making EX++ staring back at him like some divine joke, and though he isn't entirely sure what makes it special, he figures this world, with its hunger for power and war, might just love a man who has spent his life perfecting the art of destruction. But as he glances at the minister, whose expression shifts between shock and intrigue, he realizes that even these people, who summoned them as heroes, never expected someone to possess an EX skill, let alone one ranked so high, and as hushed murmurs fill the chamber, the minister's scheming mind races before he suddenly orders something to be brought, an item of importance, and when the knights return, they present a small case, opening it to reveal a collection of raw materials, wires, powder, and tubing, the basic ingredients for an explosive device. And though Jack raises an eyebrow at the situation, he barely hesitates. When the minister requests a demonstration, taking the box with a casual shrug and settling onto the floor as he works, hands moving with the precision of a seasoned professional, instinct guiding him as he fills a cylinder with powder, assembles a fuse, and watches in mild amusement as another glowing status screen appears, informing him that he can read the properties of his own bombs, yet when he hands over the finished product, expecting some kind of reaction, the minister's excitement twists into disgust, his face contorting as he stares at the mundane device in his hands, exclaiming that it's nothing special, just an ordinary explosive, no different from what any trained craftsman could make, and as realization dawns, the air shifts, the admiration in the room fading into ridicule as nobles sneer, soldiers smirk, and the summoned students exchange knowing glances, their amusement barely concealed as the minister declares his skill useless, a talent that provides no advantage, no divine power, no miracle that could turn the tide of war, just a simple ability that ensures he can make a bomb correctly, something any dedicated individual could achieve with enough practice, and with that judgment, the atmosphere turns cruel, whispers of mockery giving way to open laughter as Jack is labeled the weakest of the summoned, a mere level 1 with nothing else to offer, and as he takes in the scene, his smirk hardens, a quiet rage simmering beneath his relaxed posture, but the minister, emboldened by his perceived power, presses further, suggesting that if Jack truly has no value, perhaps selling him into slavery might be the most profitable course of action. Yet even as the words leave his lips, Jack chuckles, a low, knowing laugh that unsettles those who hear it, because while they may see him as worthless, he knows that in any world, war always has a place for men like him, and as he meets the minister's gaze with a wolfish grin, taunting him in return, the air between them grows thick with tension, but the moment shatters as a hand strikes his face, the force of the slap meant to humble him, to break him, yet all it does is ignite something dangerous in his eyes, a sharp glare that freezes the minister in place, and as Jack leans in, voice low and dripping with quiet menace, he reminds the arrogant noble that he might look like an easy target, but push him too far, and they will learn the hard way what it means to make an enemy of a bomber. Yet before he can act, knights surround him, weapons drawn, armor clanking as they tighten their formation, and though he exhales through his nose, biting back his instincts, knowing now is not the time, the minister seizes the opportunity, smirking down at him, reveling in his supposed victory before signaling the knights, who take their cue without hesitation, fists slamming into his gut, his ribs, his jaw, the sound of metal meeting flesh echoing in the chamber as he endures the blows, tasting blood yet never giving them the satisfaction of a plea, and as the minister leers over him, mocking him, telling him to learn his place, Jack lies on the cold floor, staring up at the ornate ceiling, his breath ragged, his body aching, but his mind sharp, calculating, waiting, because patience, as he reminds himself, is just another form of strategy, and when the time comes, when they least expect it, he will remind them all that the most dangerous kind of man is not the one they fear but the one they underestimate. Jack Aaron lies beaten and humiliated on the cold stone floor of the grand chamber as laughter erupts from all around him, the nobles sneering, the summoned heroes smirking, the armored knights chuckling amongst themselves while the minister grins in triumph, reveling in his supposed victory over the man they had deemed worthless. But as Jack's vision swims, his body aching from the merciless assault, something deep within him snaps, something raw and violent and untamed, and in that moment as he glares up at the laughing faces above him, his expression twists into something monstrous, something feral, something that sends a shiver through the room before he launches himself forward with the explosive speed of a seasoned fighter, fists cracking against flesh, bodies stumbling backward as chaos erupts. And before the minister can even process what's happening, Jack's knuckles drive into his face with the force of a man who has spent a lifetime surviving, sending him sprawling. His once confident expression twisted in agony, but Jack isn't done, no, not yet, because the rage burning inside him is an inferno, and as he charges forward, one of the so-called heroes barely has time to register the blur of movement before a deafening gunshot echoes through the chamber, and then another, and another, the bullets ripping through flesh, painting the pristine floors with blood, and as the reality of the massacre sets in, the laughter dies, replaced by wide-eyed horror, trembling hands, gasps of disbelief as Jack stands tall, his pistol still smoking, his gaze like that of a predator surveying prey, and as he turns his sights on the minister once more, the terrified man stumbles back, his once mocking voice now trembling with fear, but Jack doesn't hesitate, he never hesitates, and with another shot, the minister's screams fill the room, his body collapsing, writhing, broken, and as Jack exhales, tilting his head slightly, he mutters a single warning, a dark, guttural command dripping with unshaken dominance, telling the cowering figures before him to keep their fucking heads down, but before he can relish in the moment, before the weight of his counterattack can settle, the room explodes with movement as the knights, now fueled by desperation, draw their weapons, their orders clear, their intent deadly, and as their leader bellows for them to fire, the chamber is filled with the deafening roar of magical artillery, an onslaught of attacks meant to erase him from existence, but Jack, bloodied and grinning like a demon, doesn't flinch, doesn't falter, because war is what he knows, battle is where he thrives, and as the dust settles, as the smoke clears, he stands amidst the carnage, a lifeless body hanging from his grip, his expression one of amusement as he taunts them, unfazed by their horror, unshaken by their desperation, knowing that this is just the beginning, because if they wanted a hero, if they wanted power, then they had summoned the wrong man, for he is no savior, no chosen warrior of prophecy, he is Jack Aaron, and he is going to show them all exactly what kind of monster they have brought into their world. Jack Aaron moves like a force of nature, his body twisting midair as his boots slam into the armored knights foolish enough to stand in his way, sending them flying with an impact that leaves those watching frozen in stunned disbelief, because how could a mere level 1, a supposed nobody, display such overwhelming power and speed, but Jack only smirks, cracking his knuckles as he relishes the confusion in their eyes before turning his attention to the so-called king seated on his grandiose throne, the man who summoned him, belittled him, and now watches in rising dread as Jack pulls something from his vest, a small metallic object clutched between his fingers, its ridged surface unmistakable to anyone from his world, and with a casual flick of his wrist, he tosses it forward, his voice dripping with mock politeness as he calls it a gift, but as realization dawns on the minister's face, panic erupts, the throne room descending into chaos as Jack turns, his grin widening. Introducing himself not as a hero, not as a chosen warrior, but as a mercenary, a bomber for hire, a man whose price is not measured in honor or righteousness but in cold, hard cash, and before the explosion can rip through the air, he is already on the move, weaving through the crumbling chamber with the precision of a veteran, his body a blur as soldiers scream for his capture, but they are too slow, too clumsy, too predictable. And with a swift motion, he launches a grappling hook into the distance, swinging through the air with the effortless skill of someone who has survived in far more hostile environments than this, laughing to himself at the absurdity of it all, because this kingdom, this world, had called upon him expecting a savior, but what they got instead was a professional, a killer, a man who plays by his own rules, and as he lands atop the city's rooftops, his gaze flickers downward, scanning the streets where carriages and even automobiles pass below. Bizarre mixture of fantasy and technology that only fuels his growing amusement, but there is no time to marvel, no time to hesitate, because the hunt is on, the kingdom's forces are after him, and orders have already been given for his execution, yet as he moves, ducking into alleyways, formulating an escape plan, a different thought begins to take shape in his mind, because why should he be the one running? Why should he play their game, when in truth, he has already won the moment they underestimated him, and as his eyes narrow, a dark grin curling at the edges of his lips, he makes a decision, because if they wanted a war, then that is exactly what he is going to give them. Jack Aaron moves through the imperial capital like a specter of destruction, his every step leaving behind chaos and bodies as he dismantles the city's defenses with effortless brutality, kicking aside armored guards with a casual strength that defies their expectations before his gaze locks onto something far more interesting than the pathetic resistance they offer. His eyes narrowing as he turns to the mysterious woman at his side and gestures toward the massive crystalline structure. Suspended above them, its presence radiating an almost sacred energy, yet all he sees is opportunity, and as she hesitates before explaining that it is the city's core, the very heart of the imperial capital, the mechanism that governs its magical infrastructure and sustains its power, a slow, delighted grin spreads across his face because to him, that does not sound like a relic to be revered but rather the ultimate target for destruction, and before she can finish her frantic warnings about how its destruction could cripple the entire empire, all he hears is confirmation that yes, technically, he can blow it up, which to him is the only part that matters as he extends his hand, mischief and malice flickering in his eyes while he prepares to test just how far his so-called worthless skill can take him, and as his bomb-making expertise intertwines with the unstable energy of the core, the structure itself begins to tremble, its information displayed before him as if it were a mere game mechanic, revealing its overwhelming potential for annihilation, and as cracks form along its radiant surface, the woman's panic escalates into desperate pleas, but Jack simply claps his hands together in mock appreciation of the impending destruction, reveling in the beauty of his own handiwork before turning his attention to his so-called comrade who now trembles before him, begging for mercy, reminding him that she helped him and pleading for her life with eyes full of fear, but Jack, ever the pragmatic mercenary, merely tilts his head and humors her with a moment of consideration before pulling the trigger with a muttered apology that carries not a shred of sincerity, watching as her body collapses with the same detached amusement as he would an insignificant obstacle removed from his path, and with that business concluded, he strides away, blending effortlessly into the shadows once more, slipping past panicked guards with a smirk and a well-timed greeting as if he were merely out for an evening stroll, cracking jokes while effortlessly avoiding detection until he finds himself contemplating his next move, eyeing the vehicles in the streets with a sigh of admiration for the sheer absurdity of this world. Because truly, nothing here makes sense, yet everything seems to fall perfectly into place for him, and with one final glance back at the palace, the very heart of the empire now on the verge of ruin thanks to his touch, he decides that perhaps it is time to sit back and enjoy the show. Jack Aaron watches the imperial capital from a distance, standing beside a stolen vehicle as he finally allows himself a breath of satisfaction, his fingers gripping the trigger of his detonator while his mind echoes with the memory of the arrogant fools who dared to summon him, ridicule him, and discard him as worthless, yet now, with their precious city core primed for destruction, he can already imagine the horror on their faces as he whispers his final farewell before pressing the button and unleashing an explosion so cataclysmic that the very earth trembles beneath him, a shockwave ripping through the land as a massive plume of fire and debris erupts into the sky, swallowing the city in a furious storm of destruction, and for a moment, as he steadies himself against the sheer force of his own creation, he is left in stunned silence, his breath stolen away by the sheer scale of devastation that unfolds before his eyes, but then as the dust settles and the smoldering ruins stretch endlessly across the landscape where once a proud empire stood, the realization of his absolute victory hits him like an intoxicating rush, and he throws his head back, laughing hysterically, unable to contain the sheer joy of witnessing the complete annihilation of those who underestimated him, because in this moment, there is no grand strategy, no deeper purpose, only the undeniable thrill of destruction and the proof that even in this unfamiliar world, he is still the same man who thrives in chaos. But as his laughter subsides and the adrenaline fades, he finds himself in a quiet bar, spinning his tale to a lone alchemist, a smirk playing on his lips as he casually mentions his desire to return to his own world, though whether it is out of homesickness or just to see what else he can blow up remains uncertain, and as the girl listens with an expression of pure disbelief, her cold gaze unwavering even as she mentally labels him a lunatic beyond salvation, Jack simply leans in, grinning like a man who has no regrets, and asks with a playful glint in his eye if she might have any answers for him, because whether it's in this world or another, the only thing he's truly interested in is where he gets to cause mayhem next. Sitting across from a stoic alchemist in a dimly lit room, Jack Aaron, with his usual reckless grin, nonchalantly admits to obliterating the imperial capital, leaving his companion momentarily speechless as she struggles to process the sheer absurdity of his claim, yet he simply leans back, unfazed by the weight of his own words, as though erasing an entire city was just another day in his chaotic life. And as she coldly questions the plausibility of turning the city's core into a bomb, doubting his abilities due to his complete lack of mana, he merely smirks, amused by her limited perspective, before revealing that what he lacks in magic, he more than makes up for with something far more terrifying, and with a casual invitation, he allows her to take a closer look, prompting the girl to analyze his abilities, only to discover that his skill, bomb-making EX++, is something beyond comprehension, a power surpassing even the most legendary abilities in existence, a force capable of bending reality itself to his explosive will. And as she voices her astonishment, struggling to reconcile the ridiculousness of the situation with the sheer devastation she knows he caused, Jack listens with a mix of amusement and unexpected pride, finally acknowledging the terrifying scale of what he's capable of, though instead of feeling burdened by the implications, he seems more entertained by the realization that his talent is so broken it defies common sense. But as the conversation shifts, flashing back to the moment after his grand act of destruction, he finds himself standing beside his damaged stolen vehicle, finally allowing the weight of his actions to sink in, not out of regret, but with the mild inconvenience of realizing he might have acted prematurely, as he curses himself for not demanding a way home before blowing up everyone who could have possibly helped. And as he sighs at his own impulsive nature, his gaze drifts to the bizarre status screen floating before him, displaying an absurd jump in his level, skyrocketing from an assumed weakling to an unimaginable 385, a number so high it defies even the mechanics of the games he once played, and as the absurdity of it all fully dawns on him, he lets out an incredulous laugh, because if nothing else, at least leveling up from mass destruction means this new world might actually be fun. As Jack Aaron continues to grapple with the absurd reality of his newfound power, he finds himself testing the limits of his strength, his excitement growing as he casually punches through solid rock with his bare hands, marveling at how it crumbles like a fragile cracker beneath his grip, and with a delighted grin, he realizes that leveling up has granted him a ridiculous boost in physical abilities, sending him into a euphoric state as he leaps high into the air, half hoping to discover that flight is among his newfound talents, only to come crashing back down with an exaggerated sigh, resigning himself to the fact that while he may not be Superman, his raw power alone is more than enough to make up for it. But as he revels in his own invincibility, his moment of self-indulgence is quickly interrupted when he reaches the next town, where a suspicious group of guards scrutinizes his status, their eyes widening in disbelief as they register his absurd level of 385 and the deeply damning negative karma of -600. Causing immediate panic among them as they question the legitimacy of his existence, unable to comprehend how someone so dangerously overpowered managed to slip past security, and as the alchemist beside him looks on with a mix of exasperation and disbelief, Jack, ever the carefree troublemaker, flashes his usual shit-eating grin, claiming with mock innocence that he's neither fake nor dangerous, but when pressed about how exactly he managed to get through the gate, he casually explains that all it took was a little friendly chat. A phrase that, in his vocabulary, involves generously handing out explosives to anyone who stands in his way, and as the alchemist listens in horror, watching flashbacks of Jack effortlessly wiping out the guards with an explosion-laced greeting, she can only sigh in resigned exhaustion, muttering to herself that this man is truly in a class of his own, a walking catastrophe whose very existence defies all common sense. And as Jack chuckles at her reaction, seemingly proud of his unconventional approach to diplomacy, the chaos of his journey continues, leaving behind yet another trail of destruction in his wake. As Jack casually recounts his search for a way home, his words paint a deceptively simple picture of his journey, but the reality unfolds through grim flashbacks of his usual brand of negotiation, where a group of rough-looking men, seemingly eager to help, quickly realize their mistake when he turns the situation around with an unshakable glare and a gun pressed firmly against their leader's head, forcing them to spill information about a certain witch who might hold the key to his return. And as he processes this, his curiosity piqued by the mention of space magic, he learns that the so-called witch is not some cackling, ancient crone but rather an alchemist shrouded in mystery, a woman who lives in quiet isolation, feared by the town after rumors spread of her immense power, the kind of power that ensured none of the fools who attempted to rob her ever made it back to tell the tale. And as Jack meets this alchemist face to face, his preconceived notions shatter when he realizes She is neither old nor particularly wicked but rather a sharp-eyed, no-nonsense girl who regards him with an equal measure of wariness and intrigue, their conversation shifting from suspicions to practicalities as she, unbothered by his dangerous aura, extends an invitation for supper, an offer he readily accepts without hesitation, because no matter how reckless he may be, a free meal is never something to pass up, and as she claps her hands to summon her servants, Jack finds himself surrounded by an army of strange, humanoid constructs, their smooth, expressionless faces and obedient movements resembling something out of a sci-fi movie, though she clarifies that these are golems, creations of alchemy, not robots, a distinction Jack barely cares for as he marvels at the efficiency of her work, his awe temporarily interrupted by his own overactive imagination, which convinces him that the alchemist's hospitality might be a sign of romantic interest, though his paranoia quickly overrides that notion as he eyes his plate with a mix of skepticism and amusement, debating whether the food before him is safe to eat or some elaborate trick, his paranoia manifesting in a silent yet firm resolution. If this so-called witch tries to poison him, he'll make sure to pay her back in kind. Jack Aaron, the self-proclaimed bomber, finds himself in a strange world where his explosive talents are regarded as nearly useless, but his thrill-seeking nature never wavers, and he revels in the chaos he brings with every action. As he enjoys a simple meal with Alice, the alchemist he's reluctantly partnered with, the conversation shifts to Jack's return to his world, and the realization dawns on them that repatriation magic, a form of space-related magic, may be the key to his escape. Alice, ever the pragmatist, acknowledges the difficulty of such a feat, requiring not only extensive research but the support of a powerful organization and rare materials. Jack, though initially nonchalant, begins to consider the possibility, weighing his options as he faces the harsh truth that even with his immense power, the process may not be as straightforward as he hoped. As he ponders his next move, Jack reflects on his past actions, including the explosive destruction of the imperial capital, and how his bomb-making skills, while deadly, have made him an outcast, forever branded with a negative karma score. When he learns that such powerful magic is guarded by secretive countries, Jack becomes more frustrated, pondering if working for one of these nations might provide the resources he needs, though he's loath to work under their restrictions. Meanwhile, as Alice's mind races with the complexity of the magic, a sudden magical disturbance outside captures their attention, signaling that something, or someone, may have triggered an alarm on the gates, likely related to the very intruders they've become. Jack's mind remains focused on his goal, his thoughts torn between whether he will have to rely on the destructive power he's come to trust so deeply or find a more sustainable solution to his predicament. The journey ahead promises more chaos, and the mystery of his escape hangs in the balance. Jack Aaron, ever the unpredictable force of chaos, experiences a jolt of static electricity while casually chatting with Alice, the alchemist, who reveals that the spell she designed to incapacitate intruders is powerful enough to knock out most people but lacks the potency to subdue higher-level threats, which only adds to Jack's growing curiosity about the limits of his newfound world. As they continue their conversation, Jack catches sight of an unfamiliar figure outside, prompting Alice to explain the person's strange attire, and in true Jack fashion he dismisses the concern with a casual remark about looking out of place, not bothering to fit in with the locals. However, the situation shifts when the man in the odd clothes becomes a more pressing issue, and as Jack investigates further, he realizes the man is on the hunt for him, a survivor of the capital's destruction, and Jack's face twists with recognition as the man bellows his fury at finally tracking him down, demanding Jack's immediate attention and sounding ready to do whatever it takes to confront the one responsible for the devastation. As the tension mounts, Jack is left to consider his next move, knowing that his explosive nature has once again attracted unwanted attention, and yet, with Alice by his side, the prospect of taking on another foe, no matter how much it complicates his plans, feels almost like an invitation to stir up more trouble, pushing him deeper into a world of conflict and intrigue he never asked for but always welcomes with a wry grin and a mind full of destruction. As night falls and Jack observes from the shadows, his eyes gleam with an unsettling thrill at the realization that the fools who once mocked him are still breathing, shielded by some unknown trick or blessing, but rather than frustration, he feels only exhilaration at the thought of hunting them down and finishing what he started, for a man like him cannot find peace without seeing his targets reduced to nothing but dust and echoes. And as he strides forward with a wicked grin, his mind already envisioning their destruction, one of the so-called heroes confronts him with righteous fury, his sword drawn and his voice trembling between anger and desperation as he declares his intent to make Jack regret his actions, to plant within him the seeds of despair before striking him down, Yet Jack, unfazed and unimpressed, only tilts his head in amusement, mocking the man's dramatic proclamation as he casually points out that revealing such an intent strips away any element of surprise, but the hero's conviction does not waver as he grips his blade tighter, vowing that for a dead man like Jack, knowing a few extra details wouldn't change the inevitable, and yet the bomber simply smirks, his confidence unwavering as he invites the hero to make his move, already certain that no matter how bravely the man swings his sword, the outcome has already been decided, and with a voice as calm as it is menacing, he promises to blow him into pieces, a statement that sends his opponent into a rage as he lunges forward, fueled by a desperate desire to fulfill his self-proclaimed duty as a hero and return to his own world. But Jack, ever the unshaken force of chaos, sees the entire struggle as nothing more than another source of entertainment, a mere inconvenience to his greater goal. And as the battle ignites, the hero's mind drifts to memories of his past, of a life spent meticulously avoiding trouble while looking down on those who couldn't, of a world where he watched others fail while he calculated every move to ensure his own success. Yet despite all his careful planning, he found himself betrayed by the very system he believed in, denied the recognition he thought he deserved, until desperation drove him to an act that sealed his fate, an act that led to his rebirth in this world as someone seeking redemption. But none of that matters in the face of Jack, who, with his casual brutality and unshakable nature, tears through the hero's convictions with laughter, reminding him that fate, power, and so-called righteousness mean nothing when faced with overwhelming destruction. And as the final clash begins, Jack, ever the sadistic strategist, stops the hero mid-charge with a smirk, insisting on knowing his name first, because if he's going to turn someone into dust, he'd at least like to know what to write on their non-existent grave, before unleashing a storm of firepower that threatens to erase his opponent from existence in the blink of an eye. As the chaotic battle unfolds under the moonlit sky, Jack fires his bullets with deadly precision, fully expecting to tear through his opponent in an instant, but his eyes widen in surprise as the projectiles suddenly veer off course, reflecting back toward him with an unnatural force that sends him tumbling across the battlefield. And in that moment of confusion, his opponent, the self-proclaimed hero Minida Kuji, grins with unwavering confidence, revealing the nature of his seemingly invincible ability, a skill he calls Perfect Reflection A+, which not only nullifies any incoming attacks but also doubles the damage and sends it right back at the assailant. And as he stands tall with a victorious smirk, he boasts that this very ability is the reason he survived the explosion at the imperial capital, declaring himself undefeated as long as he possesses such a skill. Yet despite the overwhelming disadvantage, Jack merely chuckles, crouching low as he carefully observes his opponent, casually acknowledging his name as if mentally preparing to carve it into his gravestone, and with a sudden burst of speed, he lunges forward, engaging in brutal close combat, fists clashing against steel as he tests the limits of Kuji's so-called invincibility, striking with relentless force while his opponent remains smug in his perceived invulnerability. But as the fight intensifies, Jack pulls his gun once more, firing without hesitation, only for the bullets to ricochet harmlessly again, forcing him to reevaluate his approach as Kuji laughs mockingly, convinced that he has already won. Yet Jack, never one to be easily rattled, suddenly asks a seemingly out-of-place question, his voice laced with amusement as he inquires about Kuji's level, prompting the hero to scoff in disbelief before proudly declaring himself to be at level 80, certain that his power far surpasses that of an ordinary fighter. But his arrogance quickly turns to shock when Jack, with an almost bored expression, nonchalantly reveals his own level to be an absurd 385, a number so high that Kuji instinctively calls him a liar, unable to fathom the sheer gap between them. And as realization dawns upon him, a flicker of fear crosses his face, yet he refuses to back down, instead convincing himself that the difference in levels doesn't matter because his skill will still allow him to return any attack with even greater force. But Jack, ever the strategist, recognizes Kuji's fatal weakness in an instant, understanding that while his ability may be powerful, the man himself is a complete novice in actual combat, relying solely on his skill to carry him through battle without true experience or refined technique. And with that knowledge, Jack wastes no time in pressing his advantage, delivering a brutal series of kicks and counterattacks while calculating the best way to kill a man who can reflect damage without taking any himself. And as he dodges the wild swings of Kuji's blade, he smirks to himself, knowing that despite his opponent's bravado, he has already lost the moment the fight became a test of skill rather than a contest of raw ability. With the battlefield set beneath the dim glow of the night, Kuji, breathing heavily, his confidence crumbling, demands that Jack surrender, his voice laced with desperation as he clings to the delusion that victory is still within his grasp. Yet Jack, ever unfazed, merely cracks his knuckles and smirks, amused by the irony of his opponent's plea. His words a taunt rather than a negotiation as he reminds Kuji that he is only delaying the inevitable, and with that, the tension snaps like a tightly wound thread as Jack lunges forward, his movements swift and precise, closing the distance between them in an instant, and before Kuji can even react, Jack's fist connects with brutal efficiency, sending him reeling, his supposed invincibility rendered useless against the sheer mastery of hand-to-hand combat, and as Kuji stumbles, bewildered by the realization that his perfect reflection A+ is meaningless when he cannot retaliate against a technique that inflicts no direct damage. Jack capitalizes on his moment of vulnerability, maneuvering behind him with lethal grace, locking him into a vice-like chokehold, his arms coiling around Kuji's throat like an executioner's noose, and as his grip tightens, he calmly explains how he has unraveled the flaw in Kuji's defense, how a simple submission hold negates the ability that once made him feel untouchable, and now, reduced to a helpless, flailing mess. Kuji struggles, panic setting in as he realizes that for all his boasting, for all his overconfidence, he is powerless in the grasp of a true predator, and then, with a chillingly casual tone, Jack pulls out a small, unimposing firecracker, pressing it against Kuji's lips with an almost playful smirk, his words dripping with dark amusement as he calls it a parting gift, a keepsake to commemorate their encounter, but Kuji, wild-eyed and sweating, thrashes violently, the reality of his situation dawning upon him far too late, his muffled protest drowned beneath Jack's unwavering grip as the firecracker is forced past his lips, and with a flick of a lighter, the fuse ignites, the tiny flame flickering like the last embers of his arrogance, and Jack, with the calmness of a man who has already won, whispers a final revelation, reminding Kuji of his own ability, of how his skill endlessly doubles any damage received, and with nowhere for the explosive energy to escape, the force of the blast will not simply vanish but instead compound within his own body, reflecting upon itself in a relentless loop of self-inflicted destruction, and as the realization sends sheer terror through Kuji's veins, his struggles grow weaker, his limbs trembling under the crushing weight of fate, while Jack, grinning like a specter of death, watches with an almost morbid curiosity, his amusement peaking as he wonders just how long Kuji can endure before his own strength, the very power he once saw as his greatest weapon, becomes the force that tears him apart from within. As the deafening explosion erupts into the night, painting the sky with fire and smoke, Jack watches the destruction with a detached amusement, his silhouette standing in stark contrast to the devastation that marks the end of his opponent, and with the battle behind him and the weight of victory resting lightly on his shoulders, he lifts his arms in mock celebration, turning the gruesome reality into a theatrical performance for the bewildered onlookers, joking about a trick shot that made the ball disappear forever while the horrified townspeople recoil in terror, their eyes wide with disbelief at the sheer nonchalance with which he brushes off such a violent conclusion, but with no reason to linger, he leaves the chaos behind and returns to his allies, greeted by the piercing gaze of Alice, the mysterious alchemist who seems unfazed by his injuries yet keenly aware of them, offering only a quiet acknowledgement of his condition as he waves off her concern with his usual bravado, playfully lamenting the absence of alcohol in their hideout before she reminds him of something far less dramatic yet entirely necessary, the need to wash the blood off his body before stepping inside, a minor inconvenience that momentarily catches him off guard, forcing him into a situation far less exciting yet equally inevitable as he resigns himself to the mundane task of cleaning up, allowing the warm water to wash away the remnants of his latest battle while his mind lingers on the enigma. That is Alice, the alchemist with a reputation shrouded in fear and whispers, a woman who treats him with an unexpected kindness that feels almost unnatural, leading him to question whether her hospitality is born from genuine goodwill or something more calculated, yet even as he contemplates her motives, he cannot deny the comfort of the warm bath, the temporary peace that contrasts so sharply with the bloodshed of mere hours ago, but his moment of solitude is abruptly interrupted by the sight of Alice's peculiar mechanical servants, small robotic figures bustling into the room with efficiency, their masked faces void of expression as they take his bloodied clothes only to return them washed, pressed, and pristine, an unexpected gesture of attentiveness that leaves him momentarily stunned, forcing him to acknowledge that Alice, for all her mysteries, is a force to be reckoned with, and as he emerges fresh and dressed, he casually thanks her for the care, only to find himself once again drawn into the puzzle of her actions, for when she remarks on his remarkably fast healing, he realizes that even the soreness from battle has already faded, a testament to his absurdly high level, and with no need for further recovery, she offers to show him his guest room, leaving him with the lingering thought that for all the chaos that surrounds his life, perhaps the greatest mystery yet lies within the quiet, knowing smile of the alchemist who took him in. After settling into the mansion and receiving a room for the night, Jack eyes the comfortable bed with a smirk of satisfaction as Alice, ever composed, watches him with quiet curiosity before breaking the silence to ask how she should address him, prompting his indifferent response as he shrugs off any preference, leaving the decision in her hands, and with a slight tilt of her head and a knowing gaze, she chooses to call him Jack-san, a choice he accepts without much thought, but the moment lingers as Alice's expression sharpens with intrigue, her voice carrying an almost imperceptible weight as she tells him that she admires his strong spirit, an observation that most would dismiss as arrogance or insensitivity, yet she seems to find it fascinating, even rare, admitting that ever since she first laid eyes on him, her interest had been piqued, which only fuels Jack's amusement as he leans in with a playful grin, teasing her about falling for him at first sight, but Alice, unshaken, simply meets his gaze with a smirk of her own, telling him outright that she enjoys the company of madmen like him, reveling in the filth she sees in his soul, a remark that momentarily stills Jack's amusement as he contemplates what she sees in him, before ultimately laughing it off and accepting it as an odd compliment. Yet the conversation takes an even stranger turn when Alice reveals her unique ability to perceive the hues of emotions and spirits, an ability far from mere mind reading but one that allows her to grasp the underlying emotions of those around her, confirming that she could sense the deep hatred someone harbored toward him during his previous battle, a revelation that Jack finds both unsettling and convenient, yet there is no time to dwell on it as Alice bids him good night, leaving him to finally collapse into the inviting comfort of his bed, only to be roused from sleep the next morning by the sound of gentle knocking, his weary eyes meeting Alice's sharp yet unreadable gaze as she stands before him, composed as always, greeting him with a simple good morning before inviting him to breakfast, a meal that, to Jack's surprise, turns out to be far more delicious than expected, leading him to briefly consider that if Alice ran a restaurant, he would happily be a regular, but amidst the casual conversation, Alice suddenly remarks that she had adjusted the seasoning after noticing his lack of satisfaction with the previous night's dinner, a small yet startlingly attentive gesture that catches Jack off guard, making him realize that she notices far more than she lets on, yet before he can dwell too much on the thought, Alice turns the conversation to something far more pressing, asking what he intends to do next, to which Jack, without hesitation, declares his intent to return to his world, yet there is one last thing he must take care of first, a task that burns within him with the same intensity as the flames of the explosions he so effortlessly wields, for he has learned that the ones he thought he had eliminated still remain, plotting their revenge against him for the destruction of the imperial capital, and with a dark resolve, he makes his intentions clear. He will track down and murder the other reincarnated individuals who threaten him, ensuring that this time, there are no loose ends, and as Alice listens to his chilling proclamation, she merely offers a soft chuckle and a simple response, one that is neither approving nor condemning but instead laced with an amusement that only she can carry, telling him that she will be cheering him on, as if she were watching an entertaining play unfold before her eyes, and with that, Jack understands more than ever that for all the mysteries Alice holds, there is one undeniable truth: she enjoys watching chaos, and for now, he is the most interesting spectacle before her. After finishing their meal, Alice, her curiosity barely concealed behind her composed yet inquisitive gaze, turns to Jack and requests a demonstration of his skills, particularly his expertise in bomb-making, a craft that fascinates her not just for its destructive capabilities but for the intricate knowledge it requires, and with an amused smirk, Jack obliges, instructing her to gather materials as he follows her through the mansion to a room lined with shelves of vials and ingredients, a laboratory where she brews her potions and stores explosive substances, though as Jack eyes the neatly arranged bottles filled with cryptic labels, he quickly realizes that simply reading them does not equate to understanding their properties, leaving him to wonder how he is supposed to distinguish one volatile compound from another. Yet Alice, ever the composed and meticulous alchemist, begins explaining the different liquids and their uses, describing it rare mana-infused fluid that serves as fuel for magic tools, a flammable vegetable extract, and even the bodily fluids of a processed magic beast used in winemaking, each explanation drawing Jack deeper into contemplation as he notes that several of these substances could easily be repurposed into bomb materials with the right knowledge. And when Alice hands him a recipe, Instructing him to mix precise amounts and solidify the compound, he immediately senses something is off, questioning whether the mixing ratio is correct, but Alice merely offers a confident smile, dismissing his doubts with a simple command to trust her, which, despite his instincts screaming otherwise, he ultimately does, proceeding to craft the experimental explosives with practiced ease, and in just minutes, he produces 3 complete bombs, surprising even himself as Alice watches with unmasked astonishment, her voice betraying a rare hint of admiration as she marvels at his ability to succeed despite the flawed formula, revealing that no one before him had ever been able to follow that particular recipe to completion, a revelation that makes Jack pause as he realizes that she had deliberately given him a faulty design as a test, her true intent being to measure his skill and confirm his abilities firsthand, a move that, rather than angering him, only amuses him further, for he understands now that Alice is not merely intrigued by destruction but by the people who can wield it masterfully, and as he grins at his own success, she watches him with an unreadable expression before suddenly breaking the tension by addressing him directly, her voice quieter now yet laced with a deliberate weight, as she confesses that there is something she wishes to ask of him, a request she has held back until this very moment, and Jack, sensing the shift in atmosphere, leans in slightly, urging her to speak freely, though nothing could have prepared him for the words that follow as Alice, her unwavering eyes meeting his, utters a wish so absolute, so profound in its implications, that it nearly makes him pause, for she tells him, without hesitation, that she wants to destroy this world and asks if he would be so kind as to lend her a helping hand. As Jack stands in the laboratory still processing the audacity of Alice's request, his mind struggles to comprehend whether he heard her correctly, but her unwavering expression leaves no room for doubt as she calmly reiterates her wish to destroy the world and asks for his strength to help her accomplish it, prompting Jack to pause before rubbing his temple in exasperation, half amused and half incredulous at the sheer absurdity of the proposal, yet rather than outright rejecting her he instead asks for clarification, his instincts telling him that there is more to this request than mere destruction for destruction's sake, and with an air of composed refinement, Alice suggests they discuss the matter over tea, a stark contrast to the weight of her words, and so the two settle into an elegant sitting room where she begins recounting the tale of a certain dark mage from long ago, a woman whose ambition far surpassed the limits of ordinary mortals, a woman who was disgusted by the inherent fragility of life and sought a way to surpass it, and in her relentless pursuit of power, she created a forbidden technique, a spell that allowed knowledge and abilities to be passed into the next life, rejecting the notion that death was the end and instead treating it as nothing more than a stepping stone toward something greater, yet despite her boundless ambition, time ultimately took her before she could see her vision through, though her legacy remained embedded in the cycle of reincarnation, lying dormant until it could be awakened once more, and as Jack listens, a realization creeps upon him, connecting the dots between the story and the girl sitting across from him, and with a knowing smirk, he leans forward and asks the question that now seems obvious, if she herself is the reincarnation of that very same dark mage, and with the same calm and unwavering demeanor, Alice affirms his suspicion but clarifies that while she has inherited the power and will of her past self, her mind and identity are completely separate, meaning that the dark mage as she once was is effectively gone, her ego erased, leaving Alice as a new existence altogether, one who carries the same ambition but sees the world through her own unique perspective, and as Jack digests this revelation his intrigue only deepens, because for all the madness in her words, there is a logic to her conviction, an unshakable clarity in the way she speaks, and in that moment he understands that she is not merely chasing power for the sake of it, but rather, she is someone who has already transcended the constraints of ordinary human thought, and whether he finds it terrifying or fascinating, he cannot yet decide. As Alice continues to explain the philosophy behind her existence, she reveals that the original Dark Mage was fully aware of her own limitations and chose not to preserve her ego, fearing that stagnation would lead to mediocrity, and so she embraced death willingly, believing that true evolution comes from unpredictable and spontaneous growth, which is why she reincarnated again and again, living countless lives and accumulating vast knowledge, taking the alchemy of the second life, the golem, magic of the sixth, the craftsmanship of the ninth, and the spiritual mastery of the 13th, all combining into the being that now sits before Jack, claiming to be the culmination of all those past selves, the 13th incarnation of a will that has never ceased, a mind that is not tied to genius but to relentless pursuit, and when Jack, exasperated yet undeniably intrigued, questions whether all of this is truly for the sake of destroying the world, Alice calmly reaffirms her desire, explaining that her goal has always been to become the greatest alchemist to ever exist, and if the act of world domination is the pinnacle of achievement, then erasing the world itself would be the ultimate proof of her supremacy, because if no one else remains to surpass her, if the world itself ceases to exist, then she alone would stand at the very peak, the undisputed ultimate being, and as Jack leans back, running a hand through his hair, torn between amusement and apprehension, he mutters that she's truly a mad scientist, though deep down, he knows she is something far more terrifying, a monster in the shape of a girl, yet despite the absurdity of her ideals, he finds himself respecting her unwavering determination, and when Alice, perhaps for the first time, asks if she is disgusting for pressing forward at the expense of others, Jack bursts into laughter, slamming his hand on the table, declaring that far from being disgusting, she is amazing, because in this world, the strong consume the weak, and only those who seize power can carve their own path, and from another perspective, the moment one is beaten down, they become the villain, while the victor is celebrated as the righteous, for this is simply the way of the world, and as Jack gazes at Alice, he sees not just an ambitious alchemist but a force of nature, someone who will stop at nothing to achieve her vision, and in that realization, he cannot help but wonder whether he should step aside or throw himself into the madness and see just how far this girl's ambition can take her. As Alice gently grasps the vial of explosive liquid and thanks Jack with an expression softer than before, she admits that it is rare for someone to truly understand her, and though her ambitions may seem extreme, she has always pursued them alone, making the validation of another person, especially one as capable as Jack, a moment that carries more weight than she openly expresses, and as Jack watches her, still processing the magnitude of the request she has laid before him, she continues with quiet confidence, explaining that with her extensive knowledge of alchemy and magic, she can provide the necessary materials and equipment for large-scale bomb production, an area in which Jack himself has already demonstrated unparalleled mastery, and more importantly, she dangles an enticing offer before him, promising to help him return to his own world if he assists her in her goal, prompting Jack to lean back, rubbing his chin as he repeats her words aloud, half in disbelief and half in contemplation, because what she is proposing is not just destruction, not just chaos, but the complete erasure of the world they stand in, and yet, she speaks with such certainty, such careful calculation, that it is impossible to dismiss her as merely insane, and when he questions her further, she clarifies that what she truly desires is the power he once wielded, the very force that reduced an imperial capital to rubble, a display of destruction so absolute that even now, its legacy lingers, and with a sharp glint in her eyes, she extends her hand, asking him to lend her that very same power, acknowledging that his skill in bomb-making is an asset she cannot afford to overlook, and as Jack stares at her outstretched palm, his mind races between amusement, intrigue, and a deep, unshakable sense of foreboding, because for all the insane proposals he has encountered in his life, this is one that feels different, one that carries a weight unlike anything before, and as the words, "destroy the world," echo between them, he realizes that this moment, this decision, may be the point where his path diverges irreversibly, because to take her hand would mean stepping into a madness far greater than his own, yet to refuse would leave him wondering what might have been, and as silence stretches between them, he cannot help but smirk, because against all reason, he finds himself tempted. Jack Aaron, a battle-hardened mercenary known as the Bomber, finds himself pulled into a world far beyond his own, where magic and alchemy dictate power, yet the gift bestowed upon him, bomb-making, is ridiculed as insignificant. Cast aside by those who summoned him and dismissed as worthless, he crosses paths with Alice, a brilliant yet outcast alchemist known as the Witch, whose sharp mind and unpredictable nature intrigue him. Recognizing the mutual benefit of an alliance, they clasp hands in a tentative yet fateful partnership, determined to carve their own path through this strange new land. While Alice seeks her own undisclosed goals, Jack remains singularly focused on one thing, returning home. But when he learns that the ones he thought he had eliminated in an explosion still walk this world, his mission takes a darker turn. With his new companion at his side, he sets out on a relentless pursuit, embracing the chaos of their unlikely duo, one forged in necessity and bound by an unspoken promise. As they step forward into the unknown, an eerie yet thrilling certainty settles between them. Their journey will be anything but ordinary.